Ishmael, the firstborn son of Abraham, is often overshadowed by his younger half-brother Isaac. However, his story is an important part of the Bible, showing themes of faith, struggle, and God's care. From his miraculous birth to becoming the father of a great nation, Ishmael's life demonstrates God's promises and the complicated nature of human relationships. In this story, we explore Ishmael's journey and his significant, yet often overlooked role in the story of Abraham's descendants. Join us as we uncover the story of Ishmael, the forgotten son of Abraham. The story of Ishmael begins with his father, Abraham. Before his name was changed to Abraham, he was known as Abram, and he lived in Ur, a wealthy city in ancient Mesopotamia. Despite the comfort and prosperity of Ur, Abram was called by God to leave his home and set out on a journey into an unknown land. God promised Abram that he would become the father of a great nation. This call from God is recorded in Genesis 12:1-3, where God says, "The ancient Near East, for women who could not have children." Abram agreed to Sarai's suggestion, and soon Hagar became pregnant with Abram's child. Although this decision seemed practical from a human perspective, it was a sign that Abram and Sarai's faith in God's promise had faltered. Instead of waiting for God to provide, they tried to make the promise come true on their own terms. This choice led to tension and conflict, as it was not part of God's original plan. Despite this, God's grace and promise to Abram remained firm. As Hagar's pregnancy progressed, tension began to rise within Abram's household. Hagar, feeling empowered by her pregnancy, started to look down on Sarai, which caused conflict between the two women. Sarai, feeling threatened and mistreated, complained to Abram, who told her to handle the situation as she saw fit. Sarai, in her anger, treated Hagar harshly, and Hagar fled into the desert to escape the difficult situation. While in the desert, Hagar experienced an encounter with an angel of the Lord. The angel found her by a spring of water and delivered a message from God. The angel told Hagar to return to Sarai and submit to her, promising that her descendants through her unborn son would be too numerous to count. The angel also revealed that her son would be named Ishmael, meaning God hears, because the Lord had heard her misery. Genesis 16:7-11. This encounter showed that, even though Ishmael was conceived in a moment of human doubt, he was still under God's care and part of his larger plan. Hagar returned to Abram's household, and when the time came, she gave birth to a son. Abram was 86 years old when Ishmael was born, and they named the boy Ishmael, just as the angel had instructed, Genesis 16:15-16. Ishmael's birth was a major moment in Abram's life, setting the stage for the fulfillment of God's broader promises, including the eventual birth of Isaac, the child of the covenant. The story of Abram, Sarai, and Hagar shows the complex nature of faith and human weakness. It highlights the tension between God's promises and human impatience. Abram's journey from Ur to Canaan, his strong faith, and his moments of doubt and failure all serve as the backdrop to Ishmael's life, laying the foundation for the complicated relationship that would develop between Ishmael, Isaac, and their descendants. Ishmael's birth was a key event in the story of Abraham and his descendants. Hagar, Sarai's Egyptian maidservant, became pregnant with Abram's child as a result of Sarai's plan to build a family through her maidservant. Although this plan was culturally acceptable, it represented a significant departure from God's promise that Abram and Sarai would have a child together. As Hagar's pregnancy progressed, the dynamics within Abram's household became more strained. Hagar's new status as the mother of Abram's heir led her to despise Sarai, which caused a great deal of tension. Feeling disrespected and perhaps regretting her decision, Sarai responded harshly, treating Hagar so poorly that she fled into the wilderness to escape her mistress's anger. Genesis 16:4-6. It was in the wilderness that Hagar experienced a divine encounter that would change the course of her life and her son's future. The angel of the Lord found her near a spring and spoke to her, instructing her to return to Sarai and submit to her authority. The angel's message came with a remarkable promise. Hagar's descendants would be too numerous to count, and her son would be named Ishmael because God had heard her misery. Genesis 16:7-11. This encounter emphasized several important themes in Ishmael's story. First, it showed God's compassion and attentiveness to the suffering of individuals, especially those like Hagar, who found themselves on the margins of society. Second, it reaffirmed that Ishmael, despite being conceived through human plans rather than God's original promise, was still under God's providence and care. Hagar obeyed the angel's command and returned to Abram and Sarai, where she gave birth to Ishmael. Abram, who was 86 years old at the time, named his son Ishmael, as instructed by the angel. Genesis 16:15-16. For a time, Ishmael was Abram's only heir, and it seemed that he might be the one through whom God's promises would be fulfilled. Ishmael grew up under the care of his father, learning the ways of a nomadic life and holding a special place in Abram's household. However, when Abram was 100 years old, Isaac, the child of promise, was born to him and Sarai, now called Abraham and Sarah. Genesis 21:1-5. The birth of Isaac dramatically changed the dynamics of Abraham's family. Ishmael, who had once been the sole heir, now found himself in a different position. The joy that had surrounded Ishmael's birth was replaced by tension and division, as Sarah's decision to take matters into her own hands led to consequences that affected the entire household. Ishmael's presence reminded Sarah of her own barrenness and her earlier choice to bypass God's plan. This tension between Ishmael and Isaac would eventually lead to the separation of Hagar and Ishmael from Abraham's household, a moment that would have lasting effects on Ishmael's destiny. The early years of Ishmael's life were marked by both his mother's struggles and his father's love. He was born into a situation filled with human complexity and divine intervention. His name, which means God hears, served as a constant reminder of God's attentiveness to human suffering and his willingness to intervene in even the most difficult circumstances. Ishmael's birth was not just the beginning of his own story, but also a crucial chapter in the unfolding narrative of Abraham's descendants and God's covenant promises. One of the key parts of Ishmael's story took place in the wilderness. After Isaac was born, tensions in Abraham's household reached a breaking point. During a feast celebrating Isaac's weaning, Sarah observed Ishmael mocking Isaac and demanded that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away to protect Isaac's inheritance. Genesis 21:8-10. Although Abraham loved Ishmael, he was deeply troubled by Sarah's demand. But God reassured Abraham, telling him to listen to Sarah because Isaac was the child through whom his covenant would be established. At the same time, God promised that Ishmael would also become a great nation because he was Abraham's son. Genesis 21:12-13. The next morning, with a heavy heart, Abraham gave Hagar some bread and water and sent her and Ishmael into the wilderness. Hagar and Ishmael wandered in the desert of Beersheba, facing the harsh realities of desert life. When the water ran out, Hagar, overwhelmed with despair, placed Ishmael under a bush and moved a distance away, unable to bear watching her son die. Genesis 21:14-16. In that moment of hopelessness, God heard the cries of Ishmael and responded. An angel of God called to Hagar from heaven, offering comfort and reassurance. The angel reminded Hagar of God's promise, declaring that Ishmael would become the father of a great nation. Then, God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water that provided the means for their survival. Genesis 21:17-19. This divine intervention highlighted several important themes in the story of Hagar and Ishmael. First, it showed God's attentiveness to human suffering. Even in the desolation of the wilderness, God was aware of their plight and responded with compassion. The provision of the well symbolized God's care, ensuring that Hagar and Ishmael would not perish, but thrive. Second, the wilderness experience reinforced the idea of God's faithfulness to his promises. Despite the circumstances of Ishmael's birth and his subsequent expulsion from Abraham's household, God remained true to his word that Ishmael would become a great nation. During their lives, Ishmael grew up in the desert, becoming an expert archer and a skilled hunter. Genesis 21:20. The wilderness, a place often associated with testing and hardship, became a place of growth and development for Ishmael. His resilience and skills ensured that he would fulfill the destiny God had laid out for him. Additionally, Hagar's role as a mother was crucial during this time. She had to rely on her fitment. Her strength and determination shaped Ishmael into a strong and independent individual.